Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something huge. How did the very idea of being an American even come to be? We're jumping back to the late 18th century to figure it out.
All right, so let's set the stage here. We're zeroing in on this really critical time, from 1754 to 1800. I mean, think about it. You've just won a revolution. You're a brand new country. Now what? You literally have to figure out who you are, what you stand for, and how you're going to tell that story, not just to the world, but to yourselves.
And here's the key thing to get. This wasn't some kind of slow, organic process. No way. As we're about to see, this identity was invented. It was a deliberate, conscious creation, an effort to say, okay, we're not just Europeans on a different continent anymore. We are something new. And this idea of being American, it wasn't just some high-minded theory being debated in a stuffy room. It was real. You could see it and feel it everywhere. It was being forged in the home, in the art people were creating, and in the laws they were writing. It was tangible.
So, where do you start building a national identity? Well, what's so fascinating is that one of the first, most powerful building blocks wasn't found on a battlefield or in a government hall. It was right inside the home. It all started with rethinking what it meant to be a woman.
This idea was called Republican motherhood. And at its core, championed by people like Benjamin Rush in his famous 1787 essay, was this, well, pretty radical argument. It said that a mother's most important job was actually political. Her sacred duty wasn't just to raise kids, it was to raise virtuous sons who understood liberty, who would grow up to be the backbone of the new republic. But, and this is a huge but, this whole idea was a massive paradox. You could see the two sides of the coin right here. On one hand, yeah, it elevated the role of a mother, gave her this huge, vital purpose in the new nation. But on the other hand, well, the reality was a lot messier. It also locked women into the domestic sphere, limited their legal rights, and completely excluded women of color. So you have to ask, right? Was this real power, or was it just a prettier cage? But here's where it gets really interesting. This idea had this huge, maybe even unintentional, side effect. The logic went something like this. If women are supposed to be the first teachers of liberty to their sons, well, then they need to be educated themselves, right? And that simple idea sparked a revolution in women's education. Suddenly you have Massachusetts pushing for elementary school for everyone, and you see this boom in new schools, academies just for girls. And of course, once that door was cracked open, you had absolute trailblazers who kicked it wide open. People like Judith Sargent Murray took that logic and just ran with it. They started saying, hey, if women are smart enough to teach the next generation of leaders, they're smart enough to earn their own living. So an idea that was meant to keep women in one role, well, it ended up planting the seeds for their future liberation. Kind of ironic, huh? Okay, so we've seen how this identity was being shaped in the home, but that was just one piece of the puzzle. It was also this huge cultural project. I mean, this new American identity started to literally take shape all around them, in the art, in the books they read, even in the architecture. Just think about it for a second. This new country needed a face, right? It needed a visual identity. And that's where artists like Charles Willson Peale stepped in. When he painted portraits of George Washington or Benjamin Franklin, he wasn't just trying to make them look realistic. No, he was creating an ideal. He was showing people what an American leader should look like. You could almost think of Peale's paintings as a kind of visual mission statement for the country. His whole focus was on these Enlightenment values. Reason, logic, innovation. He was basically painting the perfect American citizen, someone for everyone else to look up to. He was painting these new Republican virtues right onto the canvas. But that calm, logical, reasoned ideal, that wasn't the only game in town, not by a long shot. You have to contrast that with someone like John Trumbull, who went in a completely different direction. He was all about emotion. And here's a good way to think about it. If Peale was painting the ideal citizen, Trumbull was painting the ideal memory. Trumbull wasn't obsessed with getting every single historical detail right. His goal was to make you feel something. You look at his huge, dramatic, romanticized paintings like the famous one of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The whole point was to create a shared, almost mythic story for the nation. It was less about the facts and all about forging this powerful, emotional national bond. And it wasn't just painters. Writers were asking the exact same question. I mean, look at this quote from de Crèvecoeur back in 1782. What is an American? It's such a direct, fundamental question. And it shows you that literature was also right there, in the thick of it, trying to create a blueprint, trying to find the words for this new identity.
And writers were coming at this from all sides. You had guys like Benjamin Franklin, and his Poor Richard's Almanac was a massive bestseller. It basically defined the American character as being all about hard work, saving your money, being thrifty. But then, on the flip side, you had authors like Charles Brockden Brown writing these dark, gothic novels that tapped into all the anxieties and fears that were bubbling just under the surface of this shiny new republic. Even the buildings were in on the act. The main style at the time, what we call federal architecture, borrowed a ton from ancient Greece and Rome. And when you look at a building like Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, you realize this wasn't just about looking nice. It was a statement. It was a very deliberate choice to connect the new United States to these old, powerful republics. It was all about projecting stability, order, and authority to a country that was, still a little shaky. All right, so you've got the home, you've got the art, you've got the architecture, but that's the cultural stuff. To really build a nation, you need a solid moral foundation. And for the new United States, that meant they had to completely tear down and rebuild the relationship between church and state. And the key document here, the real game changer, was Thomas Jefferson's Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. I mean, this was huge. It completely broke from the old European model, where you had to pay taxes to support an official state church. Jefferson's idea laid a brand new foundation, the separation of church and state. It protected this radical idea that your personal faith, your conscience, was something the government could not touch. Now, let's be real. This amazing ideal of religious freedom wasn't extended to everyone equally, not even close. But it did open a door. It created a space where people who were usually silenced could find a voice. It meant that religion could become this powerful tool for marginalized communities. You see figures like Alan Fanfilat, the first known Black Baptist preacher in America, using this new freedom to build their own communities and articulate their own vision of what America could be, a vision of both spiritual and real-world liberty. So as we start to pull all these threads together, it's so clear that what happened here was way more than just a political revolution. From the nursery to the art gallery to the state house, this whole period was like a furnace, a crucible, where the very idea of what it means to be American was being hammered into shape.
And that's the main takeaway, really. This American identity wasn't something they just inherited from Britain or the rest of Europe. It was an invention, a conscious, active creation. Through social roles, through culture, through law, this nation was deliberately building its own personality, brick by brick from the ground up.
Which, of course, leaves us with a pretty big question for today. How much of that original invention, with all of its incredible ideals and all of its really significant built-in limitations, how much of that still defines what it means to be an American right now? That's something worth thinking about.